Right. Hello again, everyone. Um, I hope everyone's doing well. John, if you can go to the next slide, please. Um, very good morning, good afternoon, as I said. Welcome everybody to Westwood's webinar on the key themes in Northwest Europe on hydrogen. It's great to see so many of you could join us. We do have two sessions today, one at 10 a.m. UK time and at 4 p.m. So we do have a split group, but it's great that so many of you could make it this morning as well. Next slide, please, Jun. This is just a brief disclaimer. Feel free to read it at your leisure another time. Just for those of you who haven't heard of us before or have come across us for the first time, maybe not aware of our offerings, Westwood is a specialist market intelligence provider. We do have historically covered the upstream oil and gas both production side, but also the supply chain side of things. But we've also been developing a new energies business over the last 3-4 years as well. And our selected essentially specialisms for new energies is focused on climate and emissions, offshore wind, carbon capture and storage, and of course, hydrogen as well. And hydrogen has been a core part of what we have been doing, bound up within some of our different products. But if we just go to the next slide, please. What we are essentially launching today is our first sort of standalone hydrogen offering. It's initially focused on Northwest Europe. It's designed to allow you to stay on top of the evolving hydrogen market opportunity in that particular region, allowing you to assess individual projects and pipelines and the risks associated with those. And that includes our unique project certainty feature, which I'm sure you will find insightful. We'll come more to that in just a moment. But if you go to the next slide, please. What I just briefly want to do is introduce ourselves so you know who we're talking to. June, if you want to switch on your camera as well, just briefly so everyone can see you. So the two folks who are speaking with you today are myself, David Linden. I head up the energy transition business here at Westwood and have been doing so for the last 3.5 years. And I have my colleague, Jun Sasamura here with me as well today, who's a senior analyst in the team focused on hydrogen. And has been working very hard, obviously, on getting this solution out there to you. Go to the next slide, please. So just briefly an agenda. There are essentially two parts of what we're going to be doing today. The first sort of three elements are focused specifically on content. So we're going to focus on the Northwest European hydrogen market, look back at 2023 just briefly to see how has that year evolved and what does that mean for the hydrogen market in Northwest Europe. And then also the third part, which is around the key themes that you need to look out for in 2024. So how is it going to be different maybe to 2023? Then the fourth element of what we're looking to do is just to provide you a brief overview of our offering so you get some first insight as to what things look like, what we can do within that offering, and how it might suit your needs as well. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to use that to drop questions in as we go. Right at the end, so after all these different 4 bits and pieces, we will be looking to do a live discussion on some of those questions and answer them if we can as we go along as well. So look out for your questions. Please do bring them in as we go. Next slide, please. So let's get into things a little bit here. What we really wanted to do is just start to set the scene on Northwest Europe. because the focus for today, and of course our research offering, is Northwest Europe. This essentially encapsulates the countries we've highlighted on the left and the right-hand side here, both in the map and the flags. Those are the 7 countries bordering the North Sea. So that's the UK, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Denmark, and Norway. So a question, of course, you might be asking yourself is why Northwest Europe? Well, as we all know, the EU and its neighbours is essentially betting that hydrogen is going to play a key role in its decarbonisation efforts, and Northwest Europe is essential to achieving that goal. It's home to some of Europe's biggest economies, with a heavy concentration of heavy industry that needs to be rapidly decarbonised. It also happens to be a place where there's going to be significant build out of renewables, mostly as offshore wind in this particular part of the world. And there's also useful, essentially, infrastructure, right? So in the forms of pipelines and ports and other things that are available to allow a hydrogen economy to develop most easily. And to highlight the scale of ambition for hydrogen in this region, we've listed here on the left-hand side on your screen the production targets of the 7 Northwest European countries and the EU as well. So let's consider the EU target, maybe first of all. It's targeting 10 million tons of renewable hydrogen production by 2030, topped up by 10 million tons of imports by the same date. But what you see on your screen is the 10 million tons target for production at this stage. And just briefly, for those of you who may be less familiar with hydrogen, or just trying to put that into context in your own mind, essentially, an electrolyzer and renewable energy is required to produce green hydrogen. So that 10 million tons represents a requirement of over 100 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity, which would use over 200 gigawatts of renewables. Obviously, depends on efficiencies and those sorts of things. And that is essentially equivalent to all of the current solar capacity installed in Europe today. So just to achieve a 2030 target, you're going to have to reinstall an entire base of solar that currently exists in Europe again in 6 years' time, essentially. Coming back to that target, add an to the targets we've got on the screen here, at an individual country level, the UK and Germany show significant ambition, looking at 10 gigawatts each of production. And while Germany's primarily focused on green hydrogen, the UK has recently been more explicit in that it would like a sort of a 60-40 green blue split. Norway, as you'll notice, in some respects, is the odd one out here. It does not in itself have an explicit target. What it does is it mentions hydrogen as one of the solutions to achieve decarbonisation. So it's more through the kind of commitments and the announcements and the projects that Norway makes, rather than the specific targets, that we're going to go and see, how big is hydrogen really going to go and be in Norway, and that's how we'll see that story unfolding. What is also not captured, of course, in these production targets, and I've alluded to this already, is the role of imports and the trade of hydrogen in the region. Germany and Netherlands in particular have sizable import targets. This is a big import region, which is going to contribute to achieving overall hydrogen demand. And they've got those through different partnerships across the world, which are going to complement the domestic production. More on that a little bit later. Norway, again, is also slightly different in that it's also a big exporter, potential exporter of hydrogen and infrastructure development. That is going to be primarily, initially at least, based on blue hydrogen. So already from these targets, you can tell the ambition is significant, but the scale of the ambition and the dynamics behind that do already differ by country. Jun, can you just maybe go to the next page, please? Thank you. So to get a broader sense of the assessment of each country and how it's doing, how the supply chain, or excuse me, the value chain is evolving. We've pulled together this comparison you can now see on your screen. It's relatively high level, but it just gives you a real sense of development and where support of the key elements of that value chain is evolving in the hydrogen economy across these different countries. And this has been taken from some country reports that we've been writing that come as part of the hydrogen offering that we've produced. As you can tell, all countries essentially have decarbonisation targets. That then includes, apart from, of course, Norway, hydrogen targets and strategies needing to ensure that hydrogen plays a role in the transition. So it is essentially a core part of all these different economies, and it is a stated ambition of those. And someone, let's say, as I said, Norway is less formal about it, but there was also someone like Belgium, so that we've noted in here with a slightly more yellow dot or an amber color, where the target is slightly more moderate, as you noticed on the previous slide. But it's also a nearer term target. It's a 2026 target, and so it's attempting to position itself as an early mover. So it's early hundreds of gigawatts versus megawatts, excuse me, versus gigawatts. But it's trying to do things by 2026, almost sort of or jumping ahead of trying other economies. When it comes to sort of financially supporting this nascent market, funding mechanisms are now being made available across the EU and individual countries that are obviously sitting outside of the EU. This is mostly sort of targeting support for the supply of hydrogen, but essentially the mechanism and the kind of the general size of support that is being made available is now generally known, and that merits this kind of these green dots you can kind of see for the funding side of things, and the third area down in the table. The issue this region really has faced is not necessarily the availability as such of funds or the ability to say, look, we're going to be funding this market. It's more that it's actually quite difficult to access that funding. And therefore, a significant level of funding has not been allocated yet. That's impacted final investment decisions and project development in general. In general, the whole region also suffers from clarity around demand. Some areas are certainly clearer than others, but in general, the region suffers from demand clarity, as well as suitable infrastructure and transportation. It's going to be imperative, unless you've got some very enclosed projects that are point to point, that you need infrastructure and transportation options available to you to be able to create a market to essentially allow demand to evolve as well. So as a result, we're seeing significant uncertainty in hydrogen project pipelines across Northwest Europe. And that's something we will come back to again later. Next slide, please. So 2023, a year of patience. Now you've kind of got a general picture of the region's ambitions and how well the key elements of the value chain are being supported, essentially, for hydrogen to thrive. The question is, how quickly is hydrogen actually being adopted in this region? And so let's start answering that maybe by looking back at that last year, 2023, and seeing how well things have gone. Did the year essentially create more certainty or less? Certainly a lot happened in 2023. Anyone who's been active in this market for a little bit will be excited to see a lot of positives that can be drawn on. The confirmation of subsidies, the finalization of definitions of kind of what types of hydrogen and what intensities of carbon, for example, can be in hydrogen for them to be accepted. These are all needed for the industry to move forward. But there were also several delays. Two key initiatives essentially that were meant to progress what was essentially now a more muted development in 2023 than many had hoped for. So a big gap almost between announcements and actions. And that's why we dubbed it a year of patience. Things are happening, but slowly. There are several examples I could use. The European Bank, European Hydrogen Bank's sort of original announcements of 3 billion that was announced, of support that was announced, I think, in November 22, is now being scaled down, I think, in November 23 to about 800 million of support. So it's almost a scaling down, delaying of things. And Germany's hydrogen or H2 global tender for imports. So it's an international import tender as such. Was going to be launched or did launch in again November 22, with the deliveries expected in 24. So you kind of needed to know that you'd won now to deliver this year. But the winners have still not been announced. So winners should be awarded contracts at the start of this year. Things essentially are delayed. But what I'm showing on this slide is the UK's first hydrogen allocation round, HAR1, as it's known, which was meant to be providing support, or is providing support, or revenue support specifically, to hydrogen production projects. And this is such a good depiction of what I mean around how things have evolved and been delayed over time. The round opened in July 22 with 20 green hydrogen projects shortlisted soon after at the end of Q1 23, totaling almost 408 megawatts of capacity, production capacity, that is. These were scrutinized for their affordability, deliverability, etc., and wider benefits. But several months later, the government announced it expects only 250 megawatts of those contracts to be awarded. And shortly after, 17 of the original 20 projects were re-shortlisted as such. And 3 key projects essentially exited. And that includes high profile, relatively at least larger projects such as Gigastack and ERM Dolphin. So that was quite almost a shock as such, that these larger, more significant projects weren't even going to be included in HAR1. In the end, only 11 projects totaling 125 megawatts from the original 408 were offered contracts in December last year, literally just before Christmas, that were deemed to match the government's criteria. And even then, it was clear that not all projects could deliver in the desired time frame, and so the usual requirement, or the expected requirement, to say that you're going to take FID 3 months after receiving a contract award, that was removed. So leaving even further sort of a door open, essentially, for longer timeframes for delivery, potentially even delays. So that's 18 months for contracts to be awarded for 125 megawatts. That's not a great sign of momentum. HAR2 was also launched at the end of last year, looking to support 875 megawatts of capacity by the end of 2025. So the ambition is still there, but we've just got a bit of a delay. So if 2023 was a year of patience, what does 2024 hold for us? Jun, over to you.
Thanks, David. Yeah, and very much so. So as we look to 2024, I guess the exciting thing is that we do have a whole year ahead of us. And this year is really going to be a year for action, off the back of what we're calling a year of patience in 23, with further clarity and announcements from governments, agencies on awaited regulations and funding mechanisms, which are really going to help to create the velocity the market needs to ensure continued positive momentum. So in the UK, the UK progressed in a number of areas last year, as David mentioned, with the noted milestone again of its HAR1 awarded contracts in December. Passed also in the latter months of last year was the Energy Act, which legislated for the creation of a future system operator, or FSO. So that's set to be established in 2024 with the FSO. So the FSO will shift essentially the country's energy system into a more integrated solution, hoping to deliver, I guess, a more sustainable, secure, and ultimately economic network. So the aim of the FSO is really to address network constraints issues, so constraint issues, and strategically plan gas, electricity, and importantly hydrogen networks, with the FSO responsible for the strategic network planning for hydrogen transportation and storage from 2026. So this FSO role, it's crucial. It's a crucial role. It's important for the development of the hydrogen market in the UK, as it's going to help to shift from early stage sort of localized supply and demand to that point-to-point hydrogen projects towards the development of a hydrogen market that can also play, I guess, a wider role in addressing electricity network constraints through long-term storage. Regulations are also key to provide clarity on the demand side. So, for example, in maritime, you have engine manufacturers like Wärtsilä and MAN developing their technologies, companies like Yara, who have an ammonia container ship in development to travel between Norway and Germany from 2026. And they're awaiting finalized guidelines from the IMO on the use of hydrogen and ammonia as a shipping fuel. Now, that announcement, which is expected in December of this year, and announcements like these are going to be crucial as shipbuilders, operators, port authorities, they're all going to be requiring more clarity on the direction they need to take in the development of their technology and infrastructure. On the funding side, the winners of the 800 million euro European Hydrogen Bank pilot auction that opened in November of last year is set to announce its winners by April. So we're seeing, different mechanisms across Northwest Europe with the Hydrogen Bank subsidy not indexed, but a flat sum over a 10-year contract. In contrast, you've got the UK's mechanism, which sets the natural gas price as a reference price or floor for its revenue support, and France in its CFD-style mechanism, which provides operating grants. The latter, so in France, they're posting its first calls for tender of 150 megawatts, expected to launch at the start of this year. Now, how these contracts are manifested, how these funding mechanisms show evidence of progress will be something to watch throughout 2024. So like we just saw from my example with the IMO's awaited announcement, these regulations will impact the hydrogen end-use demand sectors that are going to see greater potential. Looking back quickly at 2023, it was a difficult year for some hydrogen use cases, some definite challenges faced there. So lack of low carbon hydrogen supply, lack of profitability, saw developers steer away from hydrogen fueling for passenger vehicles. So you've got companies like Everfuel closing all of Denmark's filling stations about halfway through last year. Home heating also faced some challenges in 2023. Some notable examples being UK's Whitby and Redcar hydrogen heating demonstrations, so those trials being cancelled after public opposition and a lack of a main source of hydrogen for that trial. So that being said, as you can see from the chart presented here, home heating and road transport do present relatively quite smaller portions of the expected use cases for low carbon hydrogen in Northwest Europe. So we can already see how project developers are aligning to what are the trends that we've been seeing, targeting other sectors for its hydrogen produced. Now, it's important to note that this view is not a projection of where we see hydrogen demand to be, but the assumed end-use sectors that we see supply projects targeting. So a key distinction there. You'll notice there a pronounced step change between 2029 and 2030, where we see many project announcements aiming to be operational by 2030, obviously based on the majority of the country's production targets, obviously a key target year for most project developers. The role of hydrogen in industrial decarbonization has demonstrated some greater potential in the last year and going forward. So funding for green steel projects, for instance, around Europe has occurred in countries like Sweden, France, Belgium, and Germany. Salzgitter, an example, the German steel maker, is committed to start converting its steel production facilities to run on green hydrogen alongside their electric arc furnaces from 2025. Another example, another key player in the German steel industry, ThyssenKrupp, in the last couple of weeks, even launching a tender seeking around 1.5 gigawatts of electrolysis, or the equivalent volume of blue hydrogen supply for its DRI facilities in Duisburg. So we've seen some positive signs and traction for green steel, but it's also important to highlight the large wedge that you see on the screen there, made up of export targeted projects. So these can be attributed primarily to projects in Norway and Denmark. So Norway, as David mentioned earlier, is positioning itself predominantly as a blue hydrogen exporter, obviously given the country is a leader in natural gas production and CCS. In Denmark, you've got two key projects in development, Brinto Hydrogen Island and the Dumlin project, accounting for the bulk of the country's, in this case, green hydrogen export targeted ambitions. There is uncertainty surrounding these projects, the Brinto project in particular, with significant development of offshore wind capacity required, and pushback on the development of the artificial island. So this artificial energy island, given current unfavorable economics. So while I've just mentioned a couple of projects that appear more uncertain, it's important to highlight definitely some key projects to watch in 2024. So as I've discussed, key regulations and funding mechanisms in Northwest Europe are going to help drive supply side developments. You can also see the impact that has on which direction these molecules are going in terms of end use demand sectors as well. For instance, the 11 projects awarded funding as part of the UK's HAR1 will be crucial not only for the UK, but for the wider hydrogen industry in order to generate confidence and to help more, I guess, risk-averse players see positive examples of low carbon hydrogen projects that are economically feasible. H2 Energy, they've got their 1 gigawatt green hydrogen project in Esbjerg in Denmark, which saw some progress at the start of this year with award of environmental approval in January. A positive sign, definitely, for particularly green hydrogen projects of this scale, being 1 gigawatt capacity. So the facility is going to play a key role in supporting decarbonization of heavy industry and road transportation, but Esbjerg is also a key location for the country's export ambitions, with Energinet and Gasunie agreeing in November on the next steps to enable the development of the Danish-German hydrogen pipeline. Following a similar theme here, with Germany's requirement for hydrogen imports to meet their expected demand, FID on a 100-kilometer hydrogen pipeline between France and Germany is expected at some point this year, called the Mosaic project. The predominantly converted gas pipeline is planned to supply hydrogen from the northeast of France to industrial users in Saarland in Germany. One such project feeding into this pipeline is Life's 70 megawatt green hydrogen project in Pearl. So we can see evidence here in 3 different markets, 3 different countries, how country level funding mechanisms are driving project development, like in the UK. You've got large scale green hydrogen projects seeing progress, like the one in Denmark, and infrastructure projects approaching FID, helping to enable supply and demand to meet. So now that we have started to unpick what is happening on a regulatory level to drive supply and demand, and highlighted some key projects that have seen progress, it's important to take a step back to understand what the project pipeline looks like for each of the countries in Northwest Europe. So the chart here shows the production pipeline categorized by our assessment of the certainty for individual projects and their phases to reach FID. So I will be going into more detail about the methodology, about how we calculate this later on in this webinar. But looking across these 7 countries, you can see really how their pipelines till 2030 stack up against their production targets. So a couple of key countries to highlight are France and the Netherlands. France has a national hydrogen production target of 6.5 gigawatts by 2030. Based on our understanding of the projects, we can see that at least an additional 2 gigawatts will be required to meet this target if the entire existing pipeline is realized, with quite a large if there. There are positive signs, however, with an updated strategy published in December. Now, this update included many revisions from its original strategy, which was published in 2020, with a priority to focus on several industrial regions for the development of the country's hydrogen economy. So this will place focus on the construction of pipeline infrastructure and supporting decarbonization of steel and chemical industries in particular. So with the start of the aforementioned CFD-style funding mechanism to start early this year, we should hope to see acceleration for the French hydrogen industry. Now with the Netherlands, in comparison, they have a target of between 3 to 4 gigawatts by 2030, with the pipeline of projects appearing to sufficiently meet the target. Now, while a significant portion of this pipeline is categorized as possible due to lack of some clarity on off-takers, there is a lot of momentum in the Netherlands, as you can see, with projects already reaching FID and its developments in the Port of Rotterdam, Port of Amsterdam as key transit points for hydrogen imports into Northwest Europe. So the Netherlands will definitely be an exciting space to watch. So as such, the project development pipeline is an evolving beast with a number of factors at play. So as developers win auctions, power sources are secured, technology providers are selected, government strategies are refined, we will get a more firm understanding of how the market is evolving and how we're tracking that. So now the context surrounding all of this is definitely some political uncertainty in both directions for the upcoming elections in 2024. Overall, I'll say that we don't expect significant shifts, let's say, in near-term climate ambitions or targets, but more so in the form of tweaks, I guess, in pace or timelines may happen, but these are undoubtedly key movements which we're continuously monitoring in this dynamic hydrogen sector. So to look at key takeaways.
Perfect. Thank you, Jun.
David, yeah.
There's a lot going on, obviously. Thank you for taking us through that. I hope you certainly enjoyed the last slide in particular, which I think was a very stark kind of picture of ambition and the pipeline to reach it, but then also the risks associated with that. And we'll come back to that in just a minute. But there's certainly a lot going on in this region. You know, I think it's very obvious, hopefully, from what you've seen, that Europe or Northwest Europe in particular has a big ambition. It has big targets, and it's looking to position itself as core to the kind of EU's and wider kind of European decarbonization efforts. But it's obvious also that governments, while they're sort of putting stronger support in place, each country is at a different level of development and has its own nuances. And also there's been complexity overall in the market, and things are taking time. right? I'll reiterate the point saying it's a year of patience for us. It's a year of patience for the industry. Last year was meant to be the year for action, but now and maybe cynically, we're also calling 2024 the year for action. Essentially, things haven't moved fast enough, and further clarity is required, and progress needs to be upped for the market to develop essentially in line with the targets that are out there. And what will happen, of course, is that pipeline will continue to evolve. It will change as we go forward. As Jun just mentioned there, the election year always creates either a speeding up or a slowing down of some initiatives. We don't expect a major change, but we should expect some of those funding mechanisms to come to the fore, people taking advantage of those, maybe even taking FID to a greater extent than we have seen in 2023. But a great number of dynamics to take into consideration. I see that we have a number of questions coming through. I think this is essentially the sort of the end of such a thematic content part of the slides we wanted to show. What we'll do is we'll come back to questions, as I said right at the start, towards the end here. We've still got a couple more slides to go, because what we really want to do, first of all, is talk you through our research offering, and we'll come back to questions. Jun, if you could just take me through to the next slide, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. So just very briefly again, I showed you this slide earlier on. What we've got as a solution that is launched today is something focused on Northwest Europe, the hydrogen markets in Northwest Europe, the opportunities that are there, and allowing you within that solution also to assess individual projects and the pipeline risk, as we've essentially highlighted in this presentation to you. We look at projects all the way from the kind of concept operational side. So obviously, as this market moves to the operational side of things, FID is taken, etc. We continue to track everything. And throughout that life cycle, from kind of concept operation, allowing you to take a deep dive into each of those projects to fully understand how those are evolving. There is obviously the project certainty feature, which Jun will give you a little bit more of a deep dive on, which is core to a lot of this and our assessment of projects. So I'll let Jun talk you through that in just a minute. But our whole offering is also supported, as you would expect from Westwood. It's supported by regular insights and reports. I've mentioned individual country reports that are part of this, but also sort of thematic reports as to what's going on in the industry on a quarterly basis in particular, as well as news flows, so allowing you to kind of cut through the noise and really understand what are the key news items associated with the industry in this area. But Jun, let me hand over to you so you can talk through a little bit more on the project certainty side of things.
Thanks, David. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm now going to take, and as David just mentioned, going to take some time to take you through our project certainty methodology. So this is a key feature, as been mentioned a couple of times in our offering, and it's something that we have developed based on a number of client feedback, sort of gauging what clients are saying of what's been useful. So what is project certainty? Well, hydrogen projects that have not reached EPCI stage, as we've said, are evaluated individually on a phase level based on 6 categories that you can see here and subject to a scoring process. So these categories are, as you can see here, cover the entirety of the value chain from developer, energy source through to offtake. So we, through a number of metrics, assess things like the credibility of the offtake of the developer and offtaker, whether it has secured an electrolyzer, whether it has secured an offtake agreement, energy source. So all in the context of the wider country support as well for the development of the project overall. So each of these criteria is subject to a 5-point scoring system, and it calculates project certainty statuses, as you would have seen in a couple of slides earlier. They're categorized as probable, possible, or risked based on the various factors discussed in order to reach FID. And what we've gathered from our interactions with the marketplace is that because of the nature of the hydrogen industry as it is today, especially in such an early, frankly, exciting stage of its development, there's a lot of noise, let's say, out there. So it's quite difficult to distinguish between projects that are going to progress and those which aren't. You're getting all sorts of project announcements coming left and right, progress, some progressing faster than others. So it's trying to answer the question of really of which of these have seen progress, which of these projects have seen progress, and what stages of development are they in. So our project certainty assessment really allows you to take a more, let's say, risked view of projects and the pipeline, and really help you to generate a more realistic outlook of the industry's developments. And that certainty, backed by data, so the data-driven approach really to resource allocation and investment decisions for yourself as well. So it's a key feature, an exciting feature, and one that we believe will provide quite a lot of value to its users. Exploring a bit more from our offering, getting a bit more detail from what David mentioned. What I wanted to share with you next are a couple of extracts of our country reports. So these country reports are providing a country overview of hydrogen strategy, funding mechanisms, midstream and trade ambitions, as well as a look of the country's risk project pipeline, which you can see here. So we've got the Netherlands one here as an example. So looking at the pipeline as it unfolds, how it interacts with, or how it relates to the country's production targets, and a lot of the levers and specific projects and things that are helping drive that and putting that into context. We've also have examples here in the report of case studies. So we're highlighting some key projects in that market, what's driving the certainty of it reaching FID, diving into some more specifics of what's driving that, the developers involved, the progression of offtake agreements, and so on and so forth. So apart from the reports and obviously the project certainty feature, I did want to take you through a quick live demo of the product itself. So here our landing page for our energy transition products, and if I dive into hydrogen specifically, what you can see here is all the hydrogen projects that we're monitoring in the 7 countries that we cover in Northwest Europe. So you can get it quite easily, some of these higher level information, such as obviously the country, development status, hydrogen type, capacity, the developers involved. And you can also tailor your data through this tab in Manage Columns. So you can add data columns which aren't part of the default views. So you can also, another important feature is the save search. So obviously you'll move columns around, you'll filter things in certain ways that you like to see it. And the save search here gives you, I guess, more readily access to the data that you need to see on a regular basis. So let's say you're particular interested in blue hydrogen projects. Let's pick a country. Let's go with the UK. So that filters that the 14 projects that we cover in blue hydrogen in the UK. And what you'll see here on the left-hand side on the project name is these are all hyperlinked. So what that will do is take you through to a detailed project view. So we have here for Acorn, obviously we've got a map, a location of where the project is, key specifications of the project, like developer, the capacity. On the right-hand side here, a key feature as well is our news. So you can keep up to date and abreast of all of the key updates, changes, milestones of each hydrogen project. Down here further along, we have our stakeholders involved, related projects, so we can capture things like carbon capture projects that are associated, carbon storage, offshore wind, for example, as well. And as I mentioned, the project certainty, key feature here. So we break that down by certainty status, the score which it's achieved, and all of the metrics driving driving the certainty status that we've assigned by phase. Quickly as well, we can dive into phase view. So that gets you down into, I guess, more phase specific information. So things like phase timelines, funding allocations. So if we filter this and as well certainty, so project certainty. So let's get some probable and possible projects for, say, let's stick in the UK, because why not? So here you have all of the UK projects with a certainty status of probable or possible. Let's pick Cromarty, for instance. And you can dive here, you can see on the project certainty, we've got the two, probable and possible phases, what's driving that. And down here, the phase specific information, you can see in phase one, the UK government awarded funding to the Cromarty project through HAR1. We also have our library here. So you can access things like the Netherlands country report that I showed you some extracts of before, some insights as well, such as our outlook for 2024, and the other countries that we cover as well. We also have the news feature. So you saw an extract of that within the project detailed view, but you can keep on top of everything that's happening in the Northwest European hydrogen market, and filter by things like activity type, obviously filter by country. You can filter by the date that the announcement happened. One thing I forgot to mention as well is within our data view here, you can export this data in the format of your choice. APIs are also available for everything on the project and phase searches for a more integrated approach into your data analysis structure. So while we currently do not have an interactive dashboard to transform this data, I guess, visually, the export and API functions definitely allow you to quickly analyze the data to see, for instance, what the project pipeline looks like and break it down for yourself. So for instance, you can see here an extract of the export. So that concludes our demo of the product. I believe we will have a poll in a moment. So if you wanted to see the product in more detail or discuss anything in more detail that we've discussed today, please, of course, put your votes in on the poll, and please do not hesitate to also reach out to us for any one-on-one demos that you may want to have or follow-up questions as well. So thank you very much. I think we might have a bit of time for maybe one or two questions.
Perfect. Yes. Thanks, Jim. Perfect. Appreciate that. Please do vote or votes or fill in the poll as suits you. I appreciate we are running fast out of time, but there were a bunch of questions that came through. As I said, for those who have asked questions that we can't answer now, we will follow up separately, individually. So you know, while you're filling in the poll, there's a series of different questions. I think maybe just to start off very briefly, there have been a couple of questions, and I've answered one of them live already around sort of country coverage. Just to briefly say, this is obviously a starting point for us, where our product is focused on the Northwest European countries that are bordering the North Sea, where we're looking to then build out from there. So if you're missing a country, get in contact. Let us know what you'd like to see, and we will be following our clients in the development of things. So. Let's briefly start off. There was a couple of different questions actually associated with infrastructure, particularly. I think there was one around our views on the development of the European hydrogen backbone, which is going to be an important one, and also around the availability essentially of storage, right? Because if you're producing all of this hydrogen, where are you going to put it if your demand doesn't exactly match supply, etc., similar to, let's say, today's natural gas market as such. Jun, may I, and you've done a lot of talking in the last half an hour or so, but can I maybe sort of throw those kind of questions to you around infrastructure? Maybe A, how important that is here, and B, what we think about the development of particularly the European backbone and the storage side of things, and what that ultimately means for development.
Yeah, of course. I guess first to say, I think as I said, you know, we're in early stages of development of the hydrogen, of let's say low carbon hydrogen industry. So what we're seeing really initially are these more localized, I guess we've said, you know, point to point, so sort of you know, hubs of supply and demand co-located next to each other, and those are obviously very crucial in order to kickstart the development of projects, start to see the, you know, feasibility of how these projects are developed in different countries, different mechanisms, and so on and so forth, different end use sectors as well. But I think in order to progress that further, in order to reach the ambitions that all these countries have, obviously we've got gigawatt scale country targets, we've got EU-wide targets for production. What's going to help enable that and grow it from these more localized supply-demand co-located projects is obviously infrastructure. So that's going to really enable essentially what it needs in the true definition of a market, right? So we need, you know, to connect supply to demand sources, which may be in other places. Obviously, you've got countries which have strong import strategies, so the development of things like a European hydrogen backbone are going to be crucial in order for countries like Germany, you know, import ambitions for countries like the Netherlands in order to enable those parts of their strategy to happen. Obviously, we've seen announcements in Germany of their developments and funding allocated to their development of their internal network, obviously a key part of the hydrogen backbone. Storage, I know there's a question on storage. I think that is also going to be key. A lot of countries, for instance, like in France, are focusing on storage to help enable particularly, you know, green hydrogen production. I think the question that and the topic that comes around a lot is the question around intermittency of renewables and how that is going to affect the development of green hydrogen production in particular. So storage, of course, is definitely something that has to be considered, but saying all of this is going to have to be integrated across in a solution. You can't have one without the other. I'm not going to use the analogy that everyone's aware of with you know, poultry, chicken and eggs. I'm not gonna don't want to use that, but you know, you need all of that integrated, and infrastructure and connecting, you know, start to end, that midstream part is going to be pretty crucial.
Absolutely, and I think the timeframes are part of the issue again, right? So if you go
Yeah.
and look at some kind of what's the intermittent phase look like versus the final phase is also part of the debate, and somewhere like the UK, the debate is around, and sorry, the whole of Europe, to be fair, excuse me, is about injection of hydrogen into the grid, almost as a way, not of storage maybe, but also a way of getting rid of excess hydrogen so that you are actually have a business case in the end, right? So you have a
Mm.
way I will say getting rid of your hydrogen, but monetizing it when supply and demand don't match up. That should, of course, only be ever an interim period while you're developing these areas. But we also mentioned Belgium earlier. I think Belgium, for example, is already building a whole series of pipelines in addition to existing pipelines that are in that part of the world. Um, which are showing a strong case that things are developing fast. It'll come down to again funding, right? And somewhere like Germany is currently got 60 billion of its budget blocked. If that doesn't unblock itself, then things like a hydrogen backbone will become essentially slightly more difficult to achieve. And it'll be the same for the question we had around salt caverns. It'll be the same thing. You need a commercial case to make those work. Where's the business model, as an example? And how's that going to evolve? Okay. Um, we are fast running out of time. I think one more question we had: does the database cover offshore hydrogen projects as well as onshore electrolyzers? It does.
Yes, it does.
Excellent. I'm glad we could answer that one quickly. I think for the rest of them, just because we only have 1 minute, I don't think we do it justice at this stage. There's a great question around the EU industrial carbon management strategy. Thank you for that one. We'll just respond directly to you on that one. It did come out, I believe, yesterday was the update. Oh, yes, you said it in your question. Update yesterday. Perfect. So we'll get back to you on that one specifically. I think, yeah, as we are now at the end of our time, thank you very much for everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your questions. And for those of you who want another round, we have the same thing happening at 4 p.m. today. Any of your colleagues who might want to listen in, feel free to sign up then. But thank you again, and look forward to speaking to you again on hydrogen.